Hello, everyone. I am Benji Garcia, President of POWERinU Training and Coaching Philippines, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's complimentary webinar entitled Jumpstarting Your Leadership Career. Our speaker for tonight is Tonet Rivera. Tonet spent 37 years in supply chain management in increasingly senior international and worldwide leadership roles. He led the global supply chain of Mead Johnson, a world leader in infant nutrition. Let me just provide a few details to give you a sense for his responsibility there. His team is responsible for an annual sales of $4 billion US. He was responsible for global supply chain strategy, global procurement, worldwide manufacturing, global engineering, and physical distribution across 40 countries. He had a team of 1,500 supply chain professionals worldwide. And he was responsible for $1.4 billion in cost of goods. Tonet is also the most senior Filipino in the supply chain field, actually in all of Mead Johnson when he retired. Tonet now provides consulting services for international clients and is working on a book on supply chain management for CEOs and C-suite executives. In his spare time, though, he flies as a licensed private pilot. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Everyone, let us welcome Tonet Rivera.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Benji, and thanks to POWERinU. Let me see if I can start sharing my screen. There you go. So thank you very much. I can see that we have quite a number of participants, and I'm also quite excited to see some former colleagues. I'm excited because I'm wondering why they haven't heard enough of me when I was working with them or when I was their boss. In fact, I won't acknowledge you, and just so that I don't embarrass you. But I do have one person I'd like to mention who just sent me a message a few minutes ago that she was joining the call, and she was my admin assistant when I was still working for Mead Johnson in Singapore. So you know who you are. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. 19 days ago, a small Cessna airplane crashed on Mount Mayon. Do you remember that news? There were 4 passengers on board the airplane. They took off from the Bicol International Airport. That is a new airport right now, and they reported that they were in good weather, not perfect weather, but somewhat good weather near the airport. Outside of the airport, however, some distance away, there was a lot of bad weather. Mount Mayon was actually covered with clouds, and visibility was very poor in the rain and low-hanging clouds. They disappeared and were not heard from again until finally the crash site was found, and unfortunately there were no survivors. You know, it's quite difficult to fly in bad weather. You cannot see a mountain that may be right in front of you. Visibility is literally zero in bad weather. I know this because I myself found myself in bad weather once or twice. So you see here a picture that was taken some time ago. I learned to fly as a hobby 20 years ago. I celebrated my 20th anniversary of being able to fly an airplane alone last month. In fact, almost exactly a month ago today. The picture that you see here was taken in 2005. I had only been flying for a year and a half, and I was quite inexperienced. You can see that my son is sleeping beside me. It's a small Cessna two-seater airplane. We were flying home from Baguio to Manila. You can also see that the weather outside is quite good. You can see the land, you can see the rice fields, and you can see a few clouds. So no issues, right? However, you can also see that I look a little bit worried. You can see that from my eyes. I'm quite tense. There's a camera mounted at the cockpit, and that was taking pictures and video of us. So we were able to capture some of these pictures. Why was I worried? Well, this is what I could see in front. Manila's control tower was asking me for where I was. It said 1513, that's my airplane's call sign, say position. And I said, we're a beam Malabon over Manila Bay. We're at 1,200 feet and we want to land in Manila. And they answered 1513, we show a level 3 thunderstorm in your area. Now, there are only 5 levels of thunderstorm. And you all know what a thunderstorm is like. There's a lot of lightning, there's thunder, and there's very heavy rain. A thunderstorm is localized, but nevertheless, it's very bad weather. It's an area of bad weather. And this is what I could actually see. As you can see, there's nothing to see ahead except maybe for a few sightings of the ocean, Manila Bay, actually, but mostly everything is covered in cloud. And it's even if you're trained to fly in bad weather, it's a bit worrisome to actually fly in bad weather because all of a sudden your entire world is shrunk, is reduced to the instruments that you see in front of you. And when you're in bad weather, a pilot, when he's in bad weather, a pilot will always depend on his instruments and trust them absolutely because there's nothing else to see. So if you look at that dial in the middle of the instrument panel, the one with 2 hands, one pointed at 1 and the other one at 2, that means I was at 1,200 feet above sea level. And I was descending at 200 feet per minute. That means that in 6 minutes, I would be at sea level, right? And we don't want that to happen because that means the airplane would be in the water instead of in the plane, in the air. So 1,200 feet descending at 200 feet per minute, I knew right away I had to stop that airplane from descending. And the way to stop an airplane from descending, is you can't just point the nose up. You have to add power. You have to add power because without power, the airplane will not climb against gravity. So I added power. And nothing happened. The airplane continued to descend. We were now at 1,000 feet. And then in a few seconds, we were at 800 feet, descending at 200 feet per minute. My son was awake by now, and he could sense what was happening. He knew that it was not quite what he was used to in earlier in the flight where he could see everything. And he took the camera and took a picture outside my window. And this is what we could see. And when I looked outside the window to see what he was taking a picture of, I could see the ocean. I could see Manila Bay. And I said, oh my God, that's the ocean down there. And the last time I looked at the altimeter, we were at 700 feet and continuing to descend at 200 feet per minute. That means that in 3 minutes, we would be swimming instead of flying. What was happening? Well, it's a thunderstorm. There are downdrafts in front of a thunderstorm. There's a lot of wind. And the rain was dragging the air down. In other words, there's an actual force in the air that's pushing the airplane down. It's called a downdraft. And that's when I realized that, you know what? I need to stop fooling around and add power. And I mean add all the power we have. So instead of slowly and incrementally, step by step, increasing the power to the engine, I just added everything that we have. I pushed the throttle all the way forward, the engine responded, and the airplane began to climb. As far as I know, the lowest we got was about 600 feet above sea level. And the airplane began to climb. The needles started moving upward again. 700 feet, 800 feet, 1,000 feet. And finally, we were back at 1,200 feet, which is where I wanted to be. And this is what we saw when we burst out of the thunderstorm. When you get out of the thunderstorm, this is the happiest thing you can see. Visibility almost unlimited. You can see South Harbor below you. That's the Philippine Navy base in the distance. And if you look very carefully, you can actually see Mount Makiling all the way out there in the distance. That's how good the visibility was after the thunderstorm. And Manila Control Tower asked us again, 1513, say your position. And I said, we're beam South Harbor. Um, I'm now in visual conditions, and we'll be landing in at Naiya in a short while. I have the runway in sight, I said. And they replied, 1513, you're clear to land runway 13. And we went ahead and landed. My son, who still had the camera, looked back and took a picture of what we had just come from. And this is what he took a picture of. That's really bad weather. You can see there's rain on the windshield. There's cloud and haze all the way down to sea level. We could never have seen anything until we hit the ocean, right? But fortunately, that didn't happen, and both of us are still happily around with you guys now. My son is probably in the audience because I warned him I was going to be talking about. I learned a lot of lessons from that experience. I recount this story because even though it was 18 years ago, I still remember it very well. And I remember my instructor in instrument flying, the guy who taught me how to fly in bad weather, and also the guy who taught me how to fly aerobatics. He said, Tonet, when the airplane is not doing what you want it to do, make the airplane do what you want it to do. Make the needles move. Don't add power little by little. Don't add power incrementally, step by step. Add all the power that you have, right? Which is, what I did, but belatedly. And he said, make the airplane do what you want it to do. Make the needles move. I'd like to talk now about some of the leadership principles that I learned over 37 years of working. And if you don't mind, I'm going to talk a little bit in Filipino and a little bit and a lot of it mostly in English, but I'm going to talk in Filipino for a little bit. Those three words you see below, logos, ethos, and pathos, right? They're not the three musketeers, right? They sound like the names of the three musketeers, but they're really the critical requirements of a true leader. And I'll emphasize a true leader. I learned this from a Harvard professor who gave us a class in leadership once. Logos, ethos, and pathos. What are those? Logos is the Latin root word for logic, right? Logic means expertise. You're able to think. You have critical thinking skills. You can reason. You can evaluate. You can come to the right conclusion. In other words, you have a bit of brain power. In order to be a true leader, you have to exhibit logos. Ethos is the Latin root word for ethics. This is very important. Ethics is probably even more important than logos because ethics means authenticity. You are honest. You show your true self when you're with your team. You don't mislead them deliberately. And when you are wrong, you acknowledge it. That's what authenticity is. And that's even more important than logos. Finally, there's pathos. Pathos is the Latin root word for empathy, right? What does empathy mean? Pathos. In Filipino, ang ibig sabihin niyan, marunong kang makiramdam. Marunong kang magmalasakit. And that's a very powerful word. I choose to use the Filipino word because it's a powerful word. You can empathize with people. Nagmamalasakit ka. You understand when they are suffering. You understand when they are struggling. You understand when they are seeking answers that they cannot find, when they need help. And when you understand that, you have pathos. You're not necessarily sympathizing with them, but you're empathizing with them. And again, these are the critical requirements of a leader. If you don't have this, you can't be a true leader. Let me repeat that. If you don't have these, you can't be a true leader. This is a requirement. It's critical. It's a must have. What are some of the leadership principles that we all use at work? These are not necessarily all mine. In fact, these five leadership principles define um, our management culture at the company that I work with, Region. The first one is focus. What does focus mean? You focus on your vision, you focus on your goals. And just like I did in the airplane when I was flying in bad weather with my son, Julio, you focus on your KPIs. You focus on your key performance indicator. You survive. You make the needles move. You survive until the sun shines again and you're out of a crisis situation. It's important to focus because if you get distracted, you cannot do what you need to do. You cannot lead properly. You will lead your team astray. The second key leadership principle that we really treasured was simplify. We needed to simplify things because if you overcomplicate things, if you keep things complicated, you will just make it more burdensome for the organization to meet its goals. Let me give you specific examples, right? Any business is focused on only three real KPIs, key performance indicators. And this is true of any business, whether you're in a hospital, whether you're in a fast food company, whether you're in your own business that you're running, whether you're in a consulting business. It's all about growth, cost, and cash. Why is that? You need to grow your business all the time. Why is that important? Kasi your competitors are growing, right? Kung hindi mo sasabayan yung competitors mo, may iwan ka. You can ask Kodak. Right? They died because they couldn't keep up with their competitors in innovation. I can give you many, many examples of how companies that did not grow along with their competition simply got left behind. One perfect example of a company that grew with their competition is Jollibee, right? When McDonald's came into the Philippines, a lot of people uh, predicted that Jollibee would crash and burn and lose competitive edge, but they did not. Kasi sinabayan nila ng growth. They grew alongside their competitors. The second thing that we always sought to simplify was cost. Why is that? Because if you cannot grow your sales, if you cannot grow your business, you should focus on reducing cost. My CEO at Me Johnson always repeated that every chance he said. He would tell me, Tonet, if you're not growing sales, then you must be reducing cost. If you're not growing sales or reducing cost, then you're just using up oxygen. You're either growing revenue, you're growing the business, you're growing share, or reducing cost. That's the job of a manager. That's the job of a leader. The third thing we always tried to focus on and simplify was cash. Why is cash important? I'm going to give you two things that you can only pay with cash, right? The first thing is salary. You can't pay people's salaries with anything other than cash. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin doon sa tao mo, bayaran na lang kita ng pagkain. O kaya bigyan na lang kita ng produkto natin. Ibenta mo na lang, di ba? Para magkaroon ka ng cash. You can't do that. You have to pay your people in cash. The other thing that you cannot pay other than with cash is debt.
Yeah.
Pag umutang ka sa bangko, you have to pay in cash. When the bank comes to you and says your debt is due, you need to now start paying, amortize your debt. You can only do it with cash. And so cash is really important, especially during the pandemic. Those companies who ran out of cash really got into trouble. Kasi hindi na sila kayang magpasweldo. Hindi na nila kayang bumili ng raw materials. Hindi na nila kayang mag-produce. They couldn't continue business without cash. If you focus on these three things, you will be a good leader. It's a good leadership principle. Simplify your life. If you find yourself doing something, if you're writing a report, for example, and you think about it, and that report will not grow sales, or that report will not reduce cost, you're just using up oxygen. You're wasting your time. Simplify your life, simplify your leadership, simplify what you focus on. The third leadership principle that we had is that efforts don't count, results do, right? You know, when madalas yan tatanungin ng boss mo, ang team, no? Tatanungin ka ng boss mo, kumusta na yung project mo? How's your project going? Have you made any progress? What's happening? Tell me what's going on. And you tell him, well, we already held 5 meetings about this project. And the meetings were with many, many other departments. And next week, we will have another meeting about this. You're not really telling him results. You're just telling him efforts. And efforts don't count until you have results. Same thing as in the airplane. When my son and I were in that descent in a thunderstorm, and the airplane was going down towards the ocean because of a downdraft, you know. When I was making efforts to add power, they didn't count until the needles moved. It's only when you have results that you get results. So efforts don't count, results do. Decide on a course of action, execute your course of action, make the needles move. This is a leadership principle that we treasured among ourselves in the management team. Next leadership principle, trust is built with capability and results. Hindi lang capability. So sabi nung anak ko, sige, sasakay ako sa eroplano ni Dad. I'm going to fly with Dad. Because I trust him. Why does he trust me? Well, you know, he went to flying school. You know, apparently he's a good pilot, right? But he won't trust you very long unless you can show that you can deliver results. You can get where you want to go. You can keep your passengers alive and yourself, and you will not put them in danger. Right? So trust is built with capability and results. A little later, I'm going to talk about another pilot who had a lot of trust with his crew and his passengers because he kept them all alive. And even today, he is hailed as a hero. So this is leadership principle number 4. Trust is not just built with capability. Think about that when you ask yourself, why have they not promoted me yet? Why are they not giving me a salary increase? I've been here for 1 year and they know I'm good. My resume was very impressive. Ang ganda ng capabilities ko. I went to the best schools. I was trained by some very good people. I understand what the business is all about. You're talking about capability. If you're not getting results, that's probably a reason why you're not progressing in your leadership career. You have to deliver results. Always remember that. It's so easy to forget that. Number 5, leave the team stronger than when you joined it. To me, this is one of the most important of the leadership principles. Kailangan meron kang kapalit. You have to have succession. You have to have a successor in your team. You have to have multiple successors. Your team should get stronger. When your team starts to make decisions the same way that you would have made a decision, when somebody in your team begins to take over some of your roles, when they are able to do what you want them to do without too much coaching anymore, and without you giving them direct instructions anymore, you know that your team is becoming like you. You know that your team is getting as strong as you do, and you know that your team is getting stronger than when you first joined. You don't get promoted if you're always the smartest person in the room. That's not what gets you promoted. What gets you promoted is when people can replace you, when people in your team are stronger than you. I'll give you an example. All right. Many, many times. And you know, those of you who work with CEOs or senior management will probably know this. You know how promotion decisions are made? Well, you guess what? A lot of them are made in the cafeteria. A lot of them are made in casual conversation. A lot of them, some of them are made in the bathroom, in, in the men's room or the ladies' room, where you and your boss happen to meet each other, or maybe you're in the elevator together, and your boss says, "How are you? How's your team?" "Oh, we're fine. I think we're getting stronger." And then he says, "You know, I really like your person, let's say Alex. I really like Alex. he's doing a good job, isn't he? And then you say, yeah, he's really good. He's probably one of my strongest team members. And then he says, well, shouldn't we think about promoting him? Yes, boss, I was waiting for you to make the suggestion that maybe we should promote Alex. I'd like to promote him. And then your boss says, but isn't Alex the one working on this project that's so important right now in your department? And you say, yes, he is. He's really indispensable. He's the one making sure that that project is on time. And then your boss says, well, if we promote him, what happens to the project? Well, we probably have to wait until he finishes the project. Well, then we can't promote him right away, your boss. Kailangan tapusin muna niya yung project niya bago natin siya iangat. So, sabi mo sa kanya, bilisan niya, tapusin na niya, and maybe we can do something about his career. In those few seconds, Alex lost the chance to get a bigger salary, to move up in the organization, to get higher and bigger responsibilities, and to achieve a higher position of responsibility and management. He lost it in a few seconds. Why? Not because he wasn't good. In fact, he was very good. He lost his chance kasi wala siyang. So you can see how important it is to have a strong team, a team that is in fact stronger than you are. It's the best team that you could have. Then you can move on. I'd like to talk about the power of potential. Have you ever seen this picture before? Raise your hands or, click on the raise your hand app, reaction app, if you've seen this picture before. I'm actually interested. Okay, a few. There you go. 3 people have their hands raised, right? 5 participants. He's Nick Vujicic, right? It's very hard to pronounce his name. Nick Vujicic. What's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? He has no arms. He has no legs. He has a small foot. Actually, you can see that there on the table. His foot is growing out of his hip. And he suffers from a rare disease, which I will not try to pronounce. Right? He was born this way. He has no arms and legs. I'm astounded that there is such a disease like this. We're very, very, very lucky that we were born normally, those of us who complete. But Nick Vujicic is a very special kind of person. He was born like this, and he despaired of ever succeeding in life. If you look at a child with no arms, no legs, cannot go to school, cannot write, cannot use a computer, cannot use a telephone, cannot even embrace his parents, what kind of life will this child have? Nick Vujicic thought, I really wish they didn't bring me out into the world anymore. Sana hindi na lang ako pinanganak. It's one of the most painful things a child can say to himself. But Nick Vujicic was so disappointed that he was born like this, that at the age of 10, he tried to commit suicide. So he put water in a tub. And when there were 6 inches of water, he put himself into the tub and tried to drown himself. He tried 3 times, and each time he failed. Why? Because he couldn't push himself into the water. He was buoyant, so he kept floating. And his face would come out of the water, and he would be very disappointed because he could not even kill himself. That's how helpless he was, with no arms and legs. He could not push himself down into the tub. The 3rd time that he came up for air, an image flashed before his eyes. And that image was of his parents and his brother, who were crying at his funeral because they didn't try hard enough. And he realized in that instant that he would be disappointing his family. if he succeeded in killing himself, because they chose to bring him out into the world. They chose to try. They chose to make him come and try to be successful in the world. Nick got himself out of that tub with, extraordinary efforts, and he went on to be one of the most successful people that I've ever heard about. He went to university. He learned to read. He learned to write with that little foot of his. He can write with that. He can type on a computer keyboard with that little foot of his. He can paint. He could use a computer. He could use a cell phone. And finally, he graduated from university with honors. Actually, he then went on to become a stockbroker. He worked as a stockbroker. He became very successful, and then he found a new calling. He became a motivational speaker. So you can see here he's speaking in school, right? And he would make fun of himself. He would hop around on the table. The children would laugh, and he would say, "You know what? I've tried skiing on this thing. I can actually snowboard. Skiing is difficult. Snowboarding is a lot easier." And the children would be in awe. And then he would talk about how he owed his parents for having brought him into the world, and how he learned to be successful, and how his faith had taken him to levels that he never thought he would succeed. If you had seen Nick Vujovic when he was newborn, you would have said, "This guy is hopeless. How can he succeed in life? He's going to have a very difficult life. Wala na itong pag-asa. Walang braso, walang paa, walang binti." And yet he became a stockbroker. He became a motivational speaker. He could make students cry. He would talk about his life story. And after that, students would come up to him, high school students, and say, "I really loved your talk. Can I please hug you?" And he would always say, "I can't hug you back." He despaired of meeting someone. He said, "How can I fall in love? I can't even embrace uh, someone who I might fall in love with." And he told himself after a while, thinking for a while, he said, "You know what? I don't need arms to embrace someone. I can hold someone's heart without hands inside my own heart." He fell in love. He got married. He got married to a very, very beautiful. I'll show you her picture. That's Nick Vujovic's wife. Huh? Amazing, isn't it? They're happily married. They have 4 children, and he's still a very good motivational speaker. She shares his life together with 4 kids. He's of Serbian descent, but he was born in Australia, and the world is much, much better and luckier for him having been. The power of potential, right? At the beginning of this course, or when you were registering for the course, you were asked to score yourself on how much of your potential you were using. You remember that? Those of you who saw that question, we did take your answers. We took your answers and we averaged them, right? If you said 50% of your potential is being used, that meant you could double your efforts. You could double your achievements. You could double your career potential. You could actually go as far, twice as far as you had already gone. If you had said 100% of my potential is being used, you can't do anything more. Wala ka nang pwedeng gawin kasi hanggang doon ka na lang. That's basically what it means when you say 100%. Some of you answered 50%. Some of you answered less than 50%. Some of you answered more than 50%. I'll tell you your score as a group in a few minutes. But one day I was in, 1 year I was in EMD, which is the executive school in Switzerland, in Lausanne, Switzerland. They teach management, they teach leadership. And I was there, and they asked this question of us. They said, "How much of your potential is being used?" And I personally answered 25%. And it turned out that the class average was about 30%. But they also told us the story. This was in 2010, during the end of the global financial crisis. They told us the story of having a class of 20 European bankers, senior European bankers, in the class, and they asked the same question: how much of your potential is being used? And their class average was 20%. Can you imagine? Bankers in the middle of the global financial crisis, 2008 to 2010, only 20% of their potential was being used. Why is that? Why aren't we using all of our potential? I'll tell you another story, and maybe this will begin to give you the answer, right? Here's the other story. There was a guy from Ukraine. I'll call him John. Right? He's Ukrainian. He was born in the Ukraine. And when he was in the Ukraine, he began to have a dream of becoming a professional baseball player. That's all he wanted to become. It obsessed him. He wanted to become a professional baseball player and play for a major league team in the United States. Remember, he was in the Ukraine. And he practiced and he practiced and he practiced and he made himself stronger. He made sure that he could throw very far, could make sure that he could run very fast. And believe it or not, one day when he was finishing high school, he got an invitation from a US team to try out in the US for their farm team. You know what a farm team is? It's the team from which they develop players for their real team, right? It's a training team. So he was going to get a tryout with a major league team for their farm team. And of course, they sent him to the state. They paid for his travel, and he got to the United States. He was very confident. This was his dream come true. He was going to become a professional baseball player. And he started throwing the ball during the tryouts. And because he was trying so hard, he actually dislocated his shoulder while throwing the ball. And they took him to a doctor, and the doctor examined him and said, "This is not just a dislocated shoulder. You have managed to tear the muscles in your shoulder. And I'm afraid that it's irreparable. It's not going to heal. You will forever have weakness in your throwing arm. I don't think you can ever play baseball again." He was devastated. Can you imagine? Yun lang ang gusto niyang gawin eh. It was the only thing he wanted to do, to be a professional baseball player. And here was a doctor saying his dream is gone. That was his only dream. So he went back to the Ukraine. He was very, very disappointed. He didn't know what to do. His world ended. His life ended. And what happened? He went to college. He convinced himself that, okay, I'll go to college. And he took up one of the simplest courses or most boring courses that you could ever get, which is accounting. My apologies to the accountants out there. But he became an accountant. And then as he entered a company to work as an accountant, he began to have another dream. He saw that the office of the chief cost accounting manager had a window. Everybody else was working in cubicles in the office, right? And his new dream was to become the cost accounting manager. Why? Because his office would have a window. That was his new dream, all right? And that was his only dream. He never had any other career ambitions. And one day, he was told, "You're about to be promoted to cost accounting manager. We like your job, congratulations." And they were preparing to promote him when another executive had a chat with him and said, "But there's another opening in this new department called IT, information technology." It was a new department then, right? Today, IT is everywhere. AI is everywhere, right? This executive told him, "If you become an IT professional, or if you become very computer literate, if you understand computers, if you understand technology, and you are an accountant, I bet you you would go farther than if you were just a cost accounting manager." And his reaction was, "Are you nuts? Gago ka ba? Yan lang ang panaginip ko, maging cost accounting manager. Sabihin mo, huwag kong tanggapin. You want me to turn down a promotion to the only dream that I had? But then he thought about it, and he thought about it, and he said, okay, sige, I'll take the position in IT. Maybe it makes sense to learn about computers. To make a long story short, John eventually rose to become chief finance officer of the company he worked for and a company I also worked for. And that's where I met him. He was one of the best leaders we ever had. He was one of my mentors, right? He was probably my best mentor. He took me under his wing. And to this day, he continues to give me tips on leadership, tips on management, advice, even though I'm already retired. He knows about this talk. I sent him a message that I'm going to be talking about. After he became chief financial officer, he was promoted to senior vice president and then executive vice president, and he took over the global business, everything except the United States. So executive vice president for international. He had everything, sales, everything. All he wanted to become was a professional baseball. If if your potential, um, if you think that your potential is this big, right? Look at my hands. If you think your potential is this big and this is your dream, your real potential is actually as big as the universe. It's limitless. The only thing that limits your potential is here. It's your mind. It's why Nick Vujicic tried to commit suicide, because he convinced himself that nothing would ever come out of it. It's why John never tried to become anything else other than a professional baseball player, because in his mind, that's all he could do. The person, another very good friend, who eventually became CEO of Me Johnson, the company I worked for, is another such story, right? I promise you 4 quick stories. This is the third one. It is very short. He went from general manager of the Philippine subsidiary to, just 10 years later, the president and chief executive officer of the entire global company. 10 years. What were you doing 10 years ago? Right? Well, he went from a country manager all the way to, he didn't go straight to becoming a CEO. He became head of Asia. Then he became head of the United States, business leader of the United States. Then he became COO, Chief Operating Officer. And then after that, he became CEO, president and CEO. He took the company to a growth that nobody ever was able to match, right? That growth was very spectacular. He still remains a friend. He and I are in touch all the time. He knows I'm talking about it. The last story is, you're probably sitting there right now and saying, oh, pero puro dayuhan yun eh. And they're all foreigners. There are no Filipinos in your story. Well, I offer my own story, right? It didn't take me 10 years, but it took me 11 years. And in just 11 years, I went from a supply chain professional in the Philippines, which was my job in 2005 or 2003, I'm sorry. And then in 11 years, I became global supply chain leader. I was in charge of the whole supply chain of that same company that I joined in 2003. We had 17 plants in 40 countries, 17 plants in 20 countries. And we had 1,500 people reporting into me from 40 countries, cross-cultural, cross-border, Filipino. You know what my CEO told me when I was promoted? He jokingly first said, "You're about to discover that all the fun is in the regions," because I was formerly head of Asia and Pacific region, and all the problems are in global. So congratulations, you're now inheriting a lot of problems. But then he got serious and he said, "I'm going to give you advice that you should take with a grain, with sincerity, because I'm being very sincere." He said, "The problem with Filipinos," he said, is that you mistake humility. You mistake timidness for humility. You think you're being humble, so you don't want to make decisions. You want to wait for advice. You want to wait for consensus. You want to wait for other people to say, I think this is what you should do. And you think you're being humble that way. What do you think we should do? And you don't make the decision. And he said, when you became global supply chain leader, nobody else knew more about supply chain in this company than you. If you decide to close a factory because of a quality problem, nobody is going to question you. If you need to make a decision about recalling a product because it has a quality defect, nobody is going to question you. If you decide to buy a futures contract for dairy products, for milk, because we were in infant nutrition, and if you buy 1 year's supply of milk on a forward contract, nobody is going to question you. Nobody knows better than you when it comes to procurement, to manufacturing, to distribution. Nobody will question your decision, he said. So make the decision, he said. Make the decision to them. Nobody will question. Nobody will dare question. You're at the top of the pile. I never forgot that lesson. That lesson was in 2014, and just 4 years later, we retired. We both retired happily. You would not think I would still learn something at that late stage in my career, but I learned a lot from it. Unlock your potential. Okay. How do you do that? You continue to learn. If you're in a corporate environment, or even if you're running your own business right now, learn finance. It's simpler than you think. It unlocks more senior position. Double your team's capability, train them, teach them, help them grow, and then leverage them twice as hard. Make them accomplish twice as much. Your class average is 49%. You all think as a group that only 49% of your potential is being used. Think about that. You can double your achievements. You can double your capability. You can double your rank. You can go twice as far in your organization as you think you can, as you have already have. You're only using less than half of your 49%, half of your capability, half of your potential. Only half of your potential is being used. And then leverage your leadership, right? This is how you increase your potential. Unlock more senior positions by learning finance. It's actually easy. It's easy. I can teach you all three key financial statements: cash flow, balance sheet, and income statement in 20 minutes. Because somebody taught me in 20 minutes. And in 20 minutes, I can repeat that lesson to you. And we'll do that some other time. We won't do it now because we don't have time. But it's not as hard as you think. And you know what? All business is about finance. It's about growing profits for the owners of the company. And if you're in a publicly traded company, you have millions of owners. Every stockholder is an owner of your company. They pay your salary. They fund your business. So you owe them. You owe them a return on their investment. It's all about finance. Finally, leverage your leadership. Lead one level higher. Fill the room. This is one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you. What do you mean by fill the room? You know how when you enter a room, all the conversation stops. Uy, nandiyan si Tonet. Seryoso na tayo. Conversation stops. They wait for you to say your piece. They wait for you to talk first. You are filling the room when during the meeting, one person or two persons or three people will say, as Tonet said earlier, I agree with Tonet. When people start quoting you, when people start agreeing with you, when people verbalize that they are on your side, that they agree with you, you are filling the room. Ikaw yung pinakamalaking tao dun sa loob ng kwarto. And whenever I entered the room, and again, I say this in all humility, whenever I entered a meeting, I was determined. I was determined to do what I wanted to do in that meeting. I was determined to make the needles move. I would enter the meeting room and I knew sometimes that the COO was there. I knew that the chief financial officer was there, and I would still be very determined to make it go my way because I was advised to do that. And because that's my instinct. And because you have to make the needles move, make the airplane do what you need it to do. Set high expectations for yourself and your team, and then achieve those expectations. Finally, read. Not just read, watch, right? YouTube, TED Talks, read the news. Be aware of what's going on in the world. Raise your sights. Hindi lang puro Pilipinas, hindi lang puro Maynila, hindi lang puro problema sa barangay mo, or go and raise your sights. The whole world is your arena. There are many, many good TED Talks on YouTube. You can watch them for free. Some of them are excellent leadership talks. Last, I'm going to leave you with some links. When you get your PDF copy of the presentation tomorrow, you can click on these links, right? Anthony Hopkins, very famous actor, has a very good speech on believing in yourself. Believe, he said, believe in you, believe in yourself. Even if you don't believe in yourself, believe in yourself. It's like what Nick Vujicic told himself, right? Believe in your own potential. When you enter that meeting room, believe in yourself. When you're talking to your boss, believe in yourself. Be confident. Don't mistake humility for timidity. Simon Sinek is one of the best leadership gurus out there. He talks about, in this next link, he talks about millennials in the workplace. Why am I recommending this to you? Kasi karamihan sa inyo are millennials. Most of you are millennials, right? Kami mga matanda, all of us old people, we are different from you. You are different from us. And in this talk, Simon Sinek actually helps you understand what millennials are like, and he criticizes them at first. He says, itong mga millennial, mainipin, they're impatient, right? They feel entitled. They feel that they should be given increases right away. They should be promoted right away. They're entitled to success. So at first you think he's being very critical of millennials. And then he explains why they became like that. He explains whose fault it was for creating a millennial attitude. And you would be surprised. You would be surprised on how they got to be that way, and how to work with them, and how to make them your success factor. The other two links down below are Gen Z. We had a specific question, how do you manage Gen Z people? This one is a little bit more difficult, right? Gen Z people, they don't like confrontation. They don't know how to have a conversation. Bakit? Kasi lumaki sila puro cellphone. Lumaki sila puro internet, puro Facebook, where you don't actually have a conversation. You just put pictures of yourself and then you talk about things about yourself, right? So Gen Z people, when they don't like how the company is going, you know what they do? They resign. They don't ask for help. They don't voice out their expectation. They don't have a conversation. Simon Sinek in these two links explains how to lead Gen Z people and how they got to be like that. Why they got to be like that. And the why is important because as I learned long, long ago in one of my first jobs, I read a poster that said something I never forgot. He who knows how will always have a boss. He who knows why, he who knows how will always have a job. He who knows how will always have a job. He who knows why will be the boss. I'm going to end with this, and we can take questions from Benji, who has some of the questions that you submitted, and also from other people in POWERinU, Trina, who has some of the questions, and we'll take questions right now.
Thank you very much, Tonet, for that very engaging and informative sharing of leadership You always are able to share your thoughts and lessons in a very engaging way. Maraming salamat. We probably have time for only 2 questions. So apologies for those who have a lot of questions. Maybe we'll have Tonet some other time for a part 2. But as you mentioned, Tonet, there's been a lot of questions that were written up as people registered. So I'll just start with the 2 questions that were sent in advance. First one: how can we be a good leader that people follow and still maintain good relationships with them?
That's a great question. So, and I saw that question, and pardon me, but I'm going to share with you one more slide that will attempt to answer that question, and I'll take just a few minutes. All right, I'll take very short. I'm sharing that slide again, and here you go. You see, that's my son. Did he ever fly with me again after that experience? Actually, my son flew with me 3 times. Right, the first time he flew with me, he threw up. Okay, he got sick down on the ground, and he had to use a sick bag. That was the first time. The second time we flew into that thunderstorm, and then the third time he flew with me, there was a defect in the flaps of the airplane, and we had to turn back and land in Manila after just a few minutes of taking off. In those days, we could still fly from Manila. Now you ask me, I said trust is built with capability, and also with results, right? So you have to trust. You trust people because they can deliver results. So did my son ever trust me again to fly with me? Well, it took 12 years. He didn't fly with me for 12 years, but one day, about 6 months before he was going to get married, bear in mind, 6 months before he was going to get married, he asked me, Dad, can I fly with you again? And I was so touched by that. Maybe he thought that marriage was a fate worse than death. So, so I asked him later, and he said, "No, no, I really wanted to bond with you one more time in the activity that you really love, which is flying." And so we flew to Baler. And you know what? We triple checked the airplane. I made sure that everything was working. And we even checked each other's name. You're Julio, right? Yeah, yeah, and you're Tonet, right? Right. So we
I-share mo
wanted
ba sa natin, i-share mo sa chat.
we wanted to make sure that
O
nothing
yan.
would go wrong.
Ayan ako.
Oo, ayan.
Paano ka mapasok yan?
Hindi, tingnan ko nandiyan ako.
Somebody needs to
Oo.
mute.
Ito yung pangalan ko.
So, and nothing went wrong. Nothing went wrong. Why did my son fly with me again? There's a leadership guru called Maxwell who explains a little bit why people follow leaders. Okay, he says there are five levels of leadership, and I'll share them with you quickly because it answers the question very well. So the 5 levels of leadership, the lowest level is people follow you because you're their boss. Okay, you're following. They follow you because you're in a position where they have to follow you. So hindi ko naman sinabi sa anak ko na, hey, you have to fly with me because I'm your father. So I did not use position with my son. But many people, they follow you only because you're their boss. You pay their salaries. And that means that at 5 p.m., they're already on the way out of the office because you're no longer their boss. That means at 4:45, they're already in the bathroom, trying to get away from the office early, putting on their shoes putting on their sneakers so that they can run away from the office as fast as they can, so that they can catch the train, so that they can catch the bus. That's the lowest level of leadership. The next level of leadership is people follow you because they want you to lead. They're giving you permission to lead them. We all belong to a sports team when we were young, where you had to choose a team captain, and you all look to the best player on the team, and you would say, "Ikaw na, please lead us. You be the team captain." So that's the second level of leadership. People follow you because they actually want to follow you. They think that you're the best leader that's available, right? So they give you permission. That's the second lowest level of leadership. The third level of leadership is they follow you because you get things done. So that's what happened with my son, right? I kept him alive in the airplane, not just once, but 4 times. He probably trusted me. Okay, my dad is a good pilot. So this is the third level. They follow you because you get things done, because you're successful, because you can unlock resources for them, because you can clear obstacles for them, right, in their work. Very few people reach level 4 and 5. Level 4 is they follow you because you empathize with them. Nagmamalasakit ka sa kanila. And you develop them and you teach them and you make them leaders themselves. So they follow you because you teach. It's a learning organization. You serve them, right? You empathize with them and you get things done that make them successful. You are a servant leader when you achieve level 4, levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. The last level of leadership is very rare. Very few people get to this. And this is when they follow you because they long for the values and the vision that you stand. Ito yung talagang mamamatay sila para sa'yo. Willing silang sumunod sa'yo kahit saan ka magpunta. Kasi naniniwala sila dun sa mga pinaniniwalaan mo rin. They share your vision. They share your beliefs. These are the Joan of Arc type of leaders. They will die for you, right? I'm going to use a religious example. Jesus Christ was such a leader. When he was crucified on the cross, he only had 12 apostles who still believed in him. And yet, a lifetime later, by the time that the apostles were gone, half the world had become Christian. Christianity became one of the biggest religions today in the world. You would not think that would have happened. That's an example of level 5 type of leadership. So how do you become a good leader and still maintain good relations with your people? This is how you do it. Get to level 4. Become trustworthy. Make sure that people trust you. Get things done for your team. Right? Being a leader doesn't mean that you're driving people, you're nilalatigo mo sila, masama ang tingin nila sa'yo dahil ikaw ang amo nila. No. You have to be a servant leader. You serve them and you get them to succeed. That's how you do it. Benji, your last question.
I'm afraid we have used all the time we have to Tonet. I'm gonna have to end our Q&A here. And really, thank you very much for a wonderful sharing of experiences on leadership and grounded on reality. That's what makes it, I think, very, very, very different and rich for all of us, myself included. So once again, thank you very much, Tonet. And I really mean, I hope we could have you back in another time for maybe a part 2 of this lessons on leadership.
Sure. We could have a question and answer session. And I'm really sorry that we took up so much time, but I'd like to thank everyone for joining. I'd like to thank everyone for the comments that you've made in the chat, and for being so engaged like this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tonet. So for our attendees, we do invite you to subscribe to our website, www.powerinU.com.ph, to get our updates on events, webinars, and free resources from POWERinU and its partners. Lastly, everyone can access the recording of this webinar through POWERinU's website, Facebook page, and our YouTube channel. And of course, we'd like to ask everyone who registered in this webinar will automatically get an invite to our next complimentary event. This time, it will not be a webinar. It will actually be a complimentary learning session, which means it starts a little bit earlier at 6:30 and it will end at 8 p.m. So it's a 1.5-hour online workshop, and this will be on April 12, 2023. The learning session is entitled Becoming More Self-Aware, Mindful, and Motivated to be facilitated by POWERinU's Director, Trainer, Executive Coach, and Senior Consultant Elaine Cercado. This this learning session will actually be part of an emotional intelligence series. So this will just be the first part, and there will be additional sessions following this. So please be sure to register and also register in the succeeding learning sessions related to emotional intelligence. And it's your time to shine. Are you or do you know someone who is interested to showcase a short talk or presentation that will be delivered in one of POWERinU's complimentary webinars in this year? So grab this opportunity to speak in one of POWERinU's complimentary webinars. A couple of criteria here. The topic can be on leadership, management, business, and personal development. The presentation will be for a maximum of 20 minutes, and the speaker must own the rights to the materials that will be presented or show that he or she has permission granted to deliver any copyrighted materials. These are the criteria for our speaker selection. For those who are interested or would like to make inquiries, just email us at team@powerinU.com.ph. And before we officially end today's webinar, we would like to request 10 seconds of your time to answer our short poll so that we can get your feedback. Or you may scan the QR code on the screen or click the link that we sent in the chat box. Your response will help us further improve. So thank you in advance for your feedback. And with that, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today in a very insightful and very engaging talk. We do hope to see you again in our learning session this time on April 12th. Goodbye and thank you.
Thank you.